Good morning. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, with Sheldon Richmond, vice president of the foundation. And this is the Libertarian Angle, the show on the internet that brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. And we certainly have a big burning issue of the day, and that involves the national state surveillance scheme that we now learn that the National Security Agency has implemented over the American people and has had an effect now for many, many years. And this revelation, of course, came through Glenn Greenwald at The Guardian last week, where he revealed through a confidential source that he had of this massive NSA spying scheme. And then that was followed by another scheme in which the federal government, specifically the NSA, has been monitoring people's emails, other forms of social communication, and the revelations just keep coming out. Now, longtime supporters of FFF know that we had Glenn Greenwald as one of our speakers at our 2008 conference, one of our two major conferences on foreign policy and the war on terrorism, and we have that videotape online. It's worth looking at. The link is in my blog of last Friday, where I talked about what's going on here. And Greenwald was talking about these types of things back in 2008. That's why we had him as a speaker. And now there's other speakers that were speaking at that conference that we invited are now, chiming in on what's going on here with this national surveillance scheme. Jonathan Turley is a good example. But Daniel Ellsberg, he has a great op-ed today about what's going on, because as I'm sure every one of you know, the leaker, the one who provided this information to Greenwald, has now outed himself. And he's a former CIA operative and a subcontractor working for one of the defense contractors for the NSA. And his video is now linked. It's a video interview with Glenn Greenwald, and it's on Greenwald's site. We're going to be linking to it in our FFF Daily today, and he explains his reasons for doing this, and it's really worth looking at. I mean, this guy is very presentable and very sincere, and he says this is not what a free society is all about, and I felt it incumbent to speak out. And it isn't what a free society is about. I mean, this is what the communist regimes have always done. They monitor everybody's activity, and they say, well, it's to keep everybody safe from the tiny minority of people who are going to commit crimes. And so we've got to monitor everybody's activity. And I saw it in Cuba, where people look around before they talk to you. They don't know who's watching. And now we see that the same type of system exists here in this country, where they're doing the government is monitoring everybody for the pretense of keeping them safe. This is not a free society, Sheldon. How can you be free with that kind of regime? What do you think?
Well, I think that goes without saying. Every novel and movie that portrays a future, dystopia, in other words, a society that nobody would want to live in, it's always a standard feature of those imagined societies that the government is able to monitor people's phone calls and other forms of communication, including their movements. And so here we have, thanks to this disclosure, here we have two monstrous examples of that. One where their NSA is routinely gathering up what I call metadata about everybody's telephone calls, which means not the content. Of course, this is what they're telling us. We don't know what's behind the scenes, but they say that they're gathering phone numbers, who's calling whom, not names, but phone numbers and time and date, length of time, and just routinely vacuuming up all that stuff to keep in their at hand. And then the second revelation, which came out as a result of this, was that the fact that the NSA has access to the servers of all the major content providers and similar things: Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Twitter, all these things, in other words, direct access to the servers themselves. I mean, they don't have to go and get a court order; they just have the stuff. The government's reaction is typical. If you look at what the members of Congress, members of the intelligence committees, members of the administration say, it's an amazing contortion and an attempt to have it both ways. For example, they say oh, this is nothing new. We've already known about this stuff. This stuff has been debated. They also say this guy, Edward Snowden, and Glenn Greenwald don't know what they're talking about. They haven't accurately described what the NSA does. They don't know how it works. And number three, as Clapper, the director of National Intelligence, said yesterday, this is gut-wrenching because of the damage to national security. Now, you can't have all three. You can't say we already knew this, it's no big deal, and they don't know what they're talking about. So in other words, if they don't know what they're talking about, then they didn't reveal anything. On the other hand, it's a grave blow to national security. Get your story straight, folks. Get behind a closed door and come up with one single story instead of three contradictory things. I think this entitles us to discount all their cries of alarm. And Glenn Greenwald is right. In his interview this morning on Morning Joe, he said, the only danger is to the policymakers, the people carrying this stuff out, because it's a huge embarrassment for this to be revealed, and that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah, I find it fascinating how they say, well, we've advised Congress, and what they really mean by that is a small number of congressmen on the Intelligence Committee who are all sworn to secrecy. So they advise them of this. And they can't talk about it, they can't debate it, they can't question it publicly within the Congress, and they call that, well, we've advised the representatives of the American people on this, and then they say it's also legal because we've gotten a court order. Well, it's this secret star chamber type court called the FISA court that has absolutely no place in a free society, that rubber stamps whatever the government's going to do. It's all secret, it's all one-sided. You can't learn about it afterward. They know the judges are never going to be called to account for the warrants they issue, so they just say approve everything. And they call this, legitimate because they've gone through these processes. And the other thing I find just fantastic, Sheldon, is that they're accustomed to dealing with journalists that have this deferential mindset toward the government, the deference to authority mindset that we've criticized so many times here at FFF. And all of a sudden now they're encountering Greenwald, who's a journalist of an entirely different variety, that he doesn't have that reverence toward the government that the mainstream journalists have, and he's coming back swinging. When they say, well, we may have to do an investigation of, the media, the leaker and so forth, Greenwald comes right back swinging and saying, it's you people that are going to be investigated here. Don't be issuing your silly little threats against me. And I think it's that kind of independent mindset that really is the key to the future of freedom in this country. I mean, imagine if these telephone companies or Google or any of these social network companies had that kind of mindset, where they simply said, we're going to file suit against you. We're going to file a declaratory action declaring all this stuff unconstitutional. We're going to fight for the rights of our clients here. But you don't see that. And so I think this is fantastic that people are seeing what an independent mindset is like in terms of Glenn Greenwald.
Well, regarding the White House talking point that Congress has been briefed on this, of course you're right. They brief members of the intelligence committees, but two members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Ron Wyden of I believe Oregon and Mark Udall of Colorado, for years have been warning the public, going up to the very edge, never disclosing anything classified, but doing as much as they could within that constraint, have been warning the people. And as Greenwald said, go Google their names about the Patriot Act and NSA, and you'll see what they've been saying. They've been warning the people that the interpretation that the Obama administration has been putting on the Patriot Act and the FISA amendments of a couple of years ago are so much broader than was talked about even when Congress was discussing these bills and passed these bills, that it's a joke to talk about Congress being briefed or committees being briefed. We could even so this idea that they've been briefed and therefore it's all consistent with the democratic process is complete nonsense. The other thing about that is, of course, it implies that these people in Congress are, quote, our representatives, when they're part of the ruling elite. So it's just really one branch of the government telling another branch of the government. We should not confuse that with them telling us. We're not them. and they're not us. So to tell Dianne Feinstein is no comfort to me. Okay, she doesn't represent me, even if I lived in California. She doesn't represent me. She's an insider. She's got a stake in all this. And so that talking point can be thrown out completely. This is not in any way consistent with the ideals they claim to espouse, namely democratic ideals. And so we can knock that right out. This is all nonsense.
Yeah, in fact, let's keep in mind that the First Amendment specifically protects the people from Congress. It's an explicit acknowledgement that Congress is a threat to freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of religion. And that, of course, applies all across the board. That Congress is as much a threat as the executive branch, and that point you make is fantastic. I mean, it's we the people, and then there's the federal government, and specifically the national security state. And so when they talk about, we've advised another part of our government of what we're doing secretly, that has nothing to do with what we the people know about, because they don't tell us about it. I mean, the fact that this scheme's going on for 6 years or so is absolutely incredible. And another aspect of this is the reaction of so many people. I just find it appalling where so many ordinary Americans just say, they're keeping us safe, and so I'm willing to live like this, and I'm not doing anything wrong, so what do I have to lose on this thing? I mean, it shows you how far we have lost the concept. If so many Americans have lost the concept of what it truly means to be free. I mean, this is what goes on in communist regimes, where everybody's being monitored, being watched, and yet I think most people in those regimes know that this is not freedom. Freedom is a system in which the government that lacks the ability, the power to monitor what you're doing. You have this zone of privacy where you can live your life any way you choose, as long as your conduct is peaceful. And this notion that people have, at least they're keeping us safe, it's an absolute, it's a denigration of the principles of freedom. And there's another aspect to consider here, Sheldon, that, now that this thing's out, the terrorists are going to know that they can't use this media, so they're going to avoid using it to craft their nefarious schemes. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with this entire intelligence apparatus in place over the American people, with the justification no longer existing because the terrorists aren't going to use it anymore.
Well, I doubt if this came as a surprise to any international organization. I think if any American sat around and discussed this with friends and said, okay, what do you think the government might be doing? They would have guessed in broad terms what this very program was. That they were looking at websites and getting, probably somehow getting access to the servers and monitoring phone calls in one way or another. I can't believe anybody who is full-time engaged in trying to hide from the federal government is the least bit surprised by this. It's only the American people who are surprised by this. Also, I would like to point out that this way predates communism, okay, and Marx. The Greeks were worried about who will watch our watchers, okay? This comes up in Plato. So this is a very old idea that government will be monitoring us, will always want to monitor us, and that while saying it's for our own good. So therefore, the natural question arose: well, who's watching? The people that are watching over us. And that's the thing. And there's a great quote from, okay, I want to get into this area of trust, because the government says basically what Obama comes down to is asking us we have to trust the government, right? Is there sure things, we can't tell you everything, so you're going to have to trust us. Well, that's exactly the opposite attitude that Americans are supposed to have. I mean, Jefferson long ago said the proper attitude of a free people toward a government is not confidence, but jealousy. In other words, resentment, distrust of an entity which wants to take something that we value and that belongs to us, namely our freedom. But even before Jefferson, David Hume, the great giant of the Scottish Enlightenment, friend of Adam Smith's, made a telling statement when he said, political writers have established it as a maxim that in contriving any system of government and fixing the several checks and controls of the Constitution, every man ought to be supposed a knave. In other words, you assume the worst kinds of people are going to be exercising the powers. So devise the powers with that in mind, that knaves will be exercising those powers. And he said if we forget that, and if we don't watch the watchers closely, then we'll have no security or liberty. I mean, this was, 18th century David Hume. And you can find similar sentiments in Adam Smith and all the way through, in the liberal tradition, that the proper attitude toward government is distrust, the very opposite of what they're saying we need to, show the government today. And they try to portray anyone who believes the government should be distrusted as some sort of, crazy person. Yet that's the good old American attitude, and even pre-American attitude.
Yeah, that's a great point. Before you give anybody any power, assume that it's your worst enemy, the person that you would not with that power, and then you can conclude whether the power should exist or not. And following up on this, Connors Friedersdorf, who writes for The Atlantic, has a fantastic piece today. We're linking to it in our FFF Daily, where he talks about the entire structure now that is in place, and not just the surveillance, but also the power to assassinate and indefinitely detain people, the secret prisons and so forth, that the whole structure of tyranny is in place now in the United States. And, we can hope that you elect the good person, the person that can be trusted with power. But he says there's no guarantee. And that America is no different from any other country, that when you have this entire structure that is now in place for a tyrannical regime, you get the bad person in office, and you're going to end up with a very, very dark, oppressive regime. And then at that point, it's too late to do anything about it because the structure and the powers are already in place. And that's why it's incumbent. I mean, people ask, why do you guys do this? We had this college civil liberties tour where we had Glenn Greenwald as one of our speakers, and Bruce Fine and myself and Jack Hunter. We've been at the forefront of this issue, civil liberties, privacy, the war on terrorism. People say, why do you spend so much time on this? Well, now they're seeing it. And they're seeing the whole big picture, that here's a structure of tyranny that now is in place. It's very, very dangerous. And that's why we have to keep spreading these ideas on liberty in the hopes that we can get this thing dismantled before it's too late.
All right. And, there is a sense in which this isn't new. The details are new, but the broad outline is not new. The Washington Post a few years ago did a great series. Dana Priest and William Arkin did a fantastic series, 3-4 parts. I wrote about it in Future Freedom. You can find it on the website at fff.org, about the surveillance state that was being, had been erected ever since 2001. Trillions of dollars been spent. The NSA is building, a $1 trillion facility in Utah that's going to be able to, listen in on everything, and that's on top of its already awesome powers. I mean, James Bamford has been writing about the NSA for years, about how powerful it is, and how we don't know the half of it, or much more than that. We don't even know really the tip of the iceberg. And for them to say, you got to trust us, we're really not abusing this power, and don't worry, we're only looking at foreigners, and we're only looking when we have reason to believe there's terrorism involved, and we have to go to a court. I mean, every one of those statements has to be discounted. Like you said, the court is a rubber stamp. I think since it was founded in the 70s as a result of the church hearings, which uncovered, horrible conduct by the intelligence agencies. It was founded, but it's turned down, I think, 5 requests in the 40 years. Something like that. I mean, it's a total rubber stamp, and so that's no comfort at all when they say, "Don't worry, we have to go to a judge." It's all secret. When they go to a telecom for information, the telecom's not even allowed to publicly acknowledge that they've been asked for information. They're not allowed to disclose that. They can't even tell their customers, "By the way, we're turning over your phone logs." Every one of their points has to be discounted, and the idea that we should trust them. I mean, they weren't willing to tell us about this. Like Obama the other day says, I welcome the debate. Well, if they welcome the debate, why were they looking for the leaker with a plan to prosecute? I mean, they should thank him for bringing the debate out in the open. But, of course, they don't welcome the debate. And Obama, during his 2008 campaign, of course, bashed the Bush administration for this idea that we had to trade privacy for security. Now, the other day, he's saying, well, we've got to find the right balance between privacy and security. The guy talks out of every side of his mouth. And, there's nothing unique to Obama. I know there are people who want to make him sort of uniquely evil. He's just out of the same mold as virtually every president, certainly in our lifetimes. And so he's not special in that regard, but it just shows you he's right out of that mold, the typical mold. He'll say whatever's convenient, whatever will pacify the public. And you're right, in your reference to people's attitudes, the polls are not running our way on this. People think, oh no, if it's going to keep us safe, then I'm willing to do this. I have nothing to hide. But of course, you got to look at how those questions are asked that elicit those answers. You could probably construct a poll that would get the opposite result by being a little more candid about what's going on with the government. So, listen to what the government says and then immediately discount it because it's going to be gobbledygook.
Yeah, and I think we need to keep the big picture in mind on this thing too. We can get mired down in the debate as to what should be done here, and the temptation would be, well, let's rein in the NSA, or let's have a committee monitoring the NSA and so forth. And I think we've got to really look at the root causes of all this, and I'm blogging on that today with respect to the role of U.S. foreign policy here. Because you've got a nice little system that's been put into place here over the last 50 years or so that they call this national security apparatus into existence after World War II was over in order to have this Cold War against America's World War II partner and ally, the Soviet Union. We get the CIA, which is engaging in all of these practices that are violative of a free society, of what America's all about, the LSD experiments, the MK Ultra, the regime change operations, the coups, the assassinations, and so forth. You've got this huge standing military, which is totally against everything our founding fathers stood for, what Eisenhower called a military-industrial complex. So they go abroad and they engage in all this imperialism, regime change operations, torture, assassination, installation of dictators, foreign aid, the whole shebang, invasions, occupations, and so forth. That produces the anger and hatred that engenders the terrorist attacks and the threat of terrorism. And then so what do they say? The status. Oh, well, you see, the NSA is there to monitor everybody's activities in order to keep you safe from this terrorist threat. Well, it's the threat that the other two little sub-branches of the national security state apparatus have engendered. And so I think that's why we need to keep emphasizing that this is one great big problem here. It's really a fourth branch of government as far as I'm concerned, the national security state apparatus, and that we've got to also talk in terms of not just dismantling the NSA and all this anti-American surveillance system. We've got to dismantle the justification that they use for this, and that's this terrorist threat that is engendered by the foreign policy of empire and interventionism.
Yeah, I agree. When they say that this is all to protect us, we should immediately throw it back in their faces. The national security state is what endangers us, and then provides the pretext for their protecting us. I commented during the Bush administration, it's just been carried on by Obama, that Bush, should get the Nobel Prize in Physics because he's invented the perpetual motion machine. Everything they do provokes and creates new enemies, which then justify the next thing they want to do, and that can go on forever, I guess, until the country runs out of money, and the printing presses break, or whichever comes first. But that's right. Their own activity creates the reason, quote unquote, reason for their next step, often which involves violations of our privacy and Fourth Amendment protections. So I agree totally that we have to broaden the context and not just look at that at these programs in the most narrow way. We really have to look at the full context, that the government endangers us, and then it says, and this is an old trick too, I'm sure this goes back to antiquity, they put us in danger and then they say, hey, we're the only thing that stand between you and danger. What are you going to do? You need us. But unfortunately most people fall for that because they don't, they're busy, they don't spend time reading, they need to read Crisis and Leviathan by Robert Higgs and lots of other things. And your multi-part series on the national security state, for example, to see that this is a big con game. It's what it is. It's a confidence game, and it works because Americans fall for it so easily. Well,
yeah, because they've been inculcated with the notion that they're living in a free society. I mean, that's where the indoctrination comes in. I mean, you see it at the, like I went to a ball game yesterday where, everybody stands up to praise the troops with tears in their eyes for defending our freedom. And they really believe they're free. It's Johann Goethe's famous statement, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. And so they look at this gigantic surveillance state, and they say, oh, well, this shows how free we are. I mean, it's Orwellian. It's bizarre. I mean, I think that's what distinguishes us libertarians from the non-libertarians. We know that this is not a free society, and what matters to us is a free society. In fact, even if the national security state remained in existence, the military, the CIA engaged in all their little nefarious activity overseas, engendering all that anger and hatred. If you were to ask me, well, Jacob, will you be now supportive of the NSA, given that we're going to have this perpetual threat of terrorism? I would still say no, because freedom matters more to me than anything else. I mean, that's my highest political value, to be free. So if that means taking the chance on some dying in some retaliatory terrorist strike because of U.S. foreign policy, so be it. I'm willing to take that chance because I don't want to trade my liberty even for the pretense of security, and it is a pretense. I mean, here they are having this massive surveillance scheme, and they don't prevent the Boston bombing. So it shows they can't keep us safe, but that's the pretense. And as Franklin pointed out in those great words of wisdom, that those who trade liberty for security deserve neither. And I would add, they will get neither. They will lose their freedom, and they won't get security, because the greatest threat to their security is their own government.
I agree with that. Franklin was right, and I think you make a strong point. I would only add to that it's actually even a false choice they give us, because they assume that we can't have safety unless the government is being intrusive. The fact is, owners of buildings and companies and airlines will care about the safety of their assets. They don't want to see them destroyed. And if they weren't, given a full sense of security by government, they would be taking measures consistent with individual liberty to safeguard their own valuable assets. So it's not as if the government's not doing this, then we're all in danger. That's just not true. So add private solutions regarding security with government non-intervention. We'd be much safer than we are today, where the government actively endangers us and then violates our liberty on top of that.
We'd be safer and we'd be free by dismantling this whole thing. In the last few minutes we have left, Sheldon, I want to focus in on this leaker. I mean, this guy looks very, very impressive. I saw the video this morning. And it's clear from the video that his motives are very honorable, that he says, I could have sold this to a foreign regime or whatever. But he says, what I'm interested in doing is bringing this to light because it's so wrong. And so we're going to see an interesting occurrence happen here, because you've got members of Congress, you've got members in the intelligence community. They want to go after this guy. They consider him a bad person, and he is there talking in terms of, I know they can do bad things to me. That when you take on the intelligence agencies, you're taking on the most powerful agencies in the world. And he's alluding to the fact that, they can do extremely bad things to him, and he's concerned about that. But you can see the sense of courage in this guy. I mean, this is Daniel Ellsberg, in the new generation that's saying the American people are entitled to know about this, and a free people cannot exist with this type of mechanism in place. And so I think we're seeing the likes of a great battle here between the government and the advocates of liberty.
I think so. I wish the more of the people were on our side. We have our work cut out for us. I will add one more thing about this Edward Snowden. It's been reported, it's on the record, it's in the Daily Beast, that he was twice a donor to Ron Paul presidential campaign. So just to throw in a little sidelight there. So the guy shows other forms of philosophical soundness.
Well, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's us libertarians who have really carried the banner. I mean, there have been some liberals. I mean, of course, Glenn Greenwald's a notable example, and the ACLU. and there's been some conservatives like Bruce Fine that we had on our civil liberties tour, but by and large, liberals have rolled over. I mean, they were very good when Bush was in power and doing these same things that Obama's doing, coming out and telling people how they violate the principles of freedom. But once Obama got in, they rolled over. Conservatives have always been a disaster on civil liberties. The people that are genuinely and out there in the forefront defending freedom in all its aspects, economic liberty, civil liberties, privacy, are the libertarians. So it doesn't surprise me at all that this guy was a donor to the Ron Paul's campaign. And for what it's worth, Ron Paul's got a fantastic article today that's right along the lines of what we're talking about. So yeah, we just keep fighting. With ideas on liberty. I mean, I think these are great times in which we're living here, where people are showing courage. They're standing up against the wrongdoing. They're speaking out against the wrongdoing. We're a small minority, but all great movements have started out with a small minority of people, and they give courage to other people to start doing the same thing. I mean, wouldn't it be great if some of these telephone companies and telecom companies and stuff started having that kind of courage, saying, no, you're not doing this anymore, and we're standing up against you, and we're going to protect the rights of our clients. Anyway, Sheldon, that's the show. Enjoyed it with you again, as always. If you are new to the Future of Freedom Foundation, we have a free daily email publication. We strive to make it the best libertarian op-ed editorial commentary page on the internet. Drop us an email at fff.org. Tell us you want to subscribe. And, of course, we'd greatly welcome your support, because that's how we get our work done, is through the support of our donors. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.